Welcome back to Ibogaine Uncovered, and I'm your host, Talia Eisenberg. Today I'm joined by Dr. Dalibor Sames, a world-class chemist and Columbia University researcher based in New York City who has spent nearly 2 decades studying ibogaine and its molecular mysteries. Dali is one of the rare scientists who not only studies this molecule in the lab, but after years of working with ibogaine and its analogs, he recently experienced ibogaine himself, discovering what he describes as a living teacher that reshaped both his science and his purpose. His work bridges chemistry, neuroscience, and a deep curiosity about how ibogaine and its analogs can reorganize consciousness, repair neural circuits, and shift long-held patterns. Today we explore the future of ibogaine research, what he learned from taking the medicine after decades of studying it, and how those insights are shaping the next generation of analogs and scientific breakthroughs. This is a conversation with one of the most important researchers in the ibogaine world, someone helping to define what comes next. Well, thank you for coming on the Ibogaine Uncovered show. It's been such a pleasure to have you here at Beond the last multiple days. I'd love to hear more about how you first fell in love with the molecules. It was so obscure 20 years ago. What made you find it, or how did it find you?
Yes, great to be here, and thank you for having me. This was an extraordinary experience for many reasons. And to your question, I have, as a chemist, as an organic chemist, I was aware of Iboga alkaloids. Not that they were some, famous or anything, but they were well-known alkaloids, and I found them interesting. This is more than 20 years. This is maybe 25, 30 years ago in 1990s, and I just found them interesting, and the structure was very beautiful. But there was something about them, and I was even teaching the synthesis of Iboga alkaloids in my class as a young professor, and not really knowing consciously that there are these remarkable medicines that we'll talk about. And then it was in 2005 then I kind of, didn't really work with them or did other projects, which led me to this area of neurorestoration and this idea, can we restore synapses? So that was really my angle coming to this area. And the idea was in the air that even psychiatric or mental health disorders might be caused or at least associated with synaptic dysfunction, so dysfunction of connections in the brain, the synapses. So I was looking for molecules that could restore synapses. That was the big idea that we had in the lab. And then I read, just by reading literature and reading in general, I read about Deborah Mash's studies and the whole serendipitous discovery of the anti-addiction effect. And there was this paper in 2005 providing an interesting molecular hypothesis how it might induce these long-term healing and restorative effects. So that was a big aha moment. It was like, this is it. And the molecule, I've known the molecule, and it's, for chemists, it's very interesting. It's complex.
You've said that you had aesthetic admiration.
I had an aesthetic admiration for it. And it's complex enough. It was showing these, even though anecdotal or observational reports, but remarkable, really unbelievable reports about the addiction interrupting effects. And then the cardiac adverse effects. So there were things to fix. And so it was this perfect package. And in that instant, I realized this is the molecule I was looking for. And then we started basically the work.
And that work included, creating analogs and
yes. And so included first, how do we make it in the laboratory so that we can change the structure. As chemists, we play the Lego game, that we look at the molecule as a 3-dimensional object, and we know exact with atomic precision where each atom is. And that's called the complete structure of ibogaine. So we were first learning how to make these molecules efficiently and in a way that we can make any analog, meaning we can put changes anywhere in the molecule, which is not trivial. So that took it some time. And we couldn't order the molecule because it's scheduled, right? So we had to get a license, and so all that we were setting up. And then we started studying, what does it do? And starting with the GDNF, which was that new paper that came out in 2005. GDNF it stands for a glial cell-derived neurotrophic factor, a long name for a endogenous, meaning internal protein that our bodies make that's important for development of nervous system, but it's also important for restoration, reparation, and maintenance of nervous systems. So particularly the dopamine system.
Isn't it what's responsible for, children from the ages of 0 to 7 have this? It makes you more creative. It makes you want to learn.
Yeah,
It's the good stuff.
It's a good stuff, and there are a good number of these trophic factors that come out and do their work, and then there are these phases, developmental phases. So we tried to look at that theory, and then we just went on and just kept asking questions. Okay, so how does this molecule work? And then there are more reports coming. The reports were unbelievable.
Reports from people who have experienced.
Experience.
And then it was mostly just for opiate use disorder.
Mostly opiate, and then cocaine
addiction.
Actual alcohol, and then, so it was all addiction.
And the reports were showing.
This within hours, dissolution or basically almost removal of dependence, meaning acute withdrawal symptoms.
Right. And this was the very early days when Ibogaine was used primarily for addiction, and researchers didn't understand how it works.
Correct.
And before it was used now for PTSD, TBI. So
that was before this. We didn't know this yet. There is, of course, a body of literature, body of work out there from France and Germany. So there's papers from 1900s and the 1950s. So we got into that and read all this literature and saw these different thoughts, how people thought about what the molecule is doing. But yes, it was early days. It was mostly addiction. But even that alone, if Ibogaine did just that, that was absolutely incredible, because it's just unheard of. You take somebody who's actively dependent on opioids and you attenuate that dependence by 75%.
It's incredible. I mean, that was my experience in 2010. I was addicted to opiates. I took Ibogaine, and the rapid detox, first of all, and the cravings, the desire to use completely vanished in 12 hours.
And so we were in the lab, and we're scientists. So scientists always cultivate and are raised to have this healthy skepticism, which is part of the scientific method. And scientific method really teaches us that what's the hallmark of scientific method is reproducibility, right? Good data, you have to acquire the data, then you present the data, and then either your own lab or ideally other labs reproduce it. So reproducibility is one hallmark of scientific method. So it's objectivity is another, right? So we spend centuries to separate ourselves from our subjective feelings, so the science is objective. So
what did you find?
But then we were thinking, is this even possible? We've never heard anything like it. So then I was, keep asking my students and postdocs, is this a breakthrough technology or is it a snake oil, right? It's one of those stories. And we were always, and then the more reports keep coming, more people showing effect against addiction. And then, 10, 15 years later, about 2016, we heard about these two Marines who were treated for alcohol use disorder, but they also had TBI, traumatic brain injury, and PTSD. And there was a big relief. So there were two reports. It was circulating in the Ibogaine circle, right, in the Ibogaine sphere. So I was like, oh my God, this is another big one comes.
Breaking news. This doesn't just work for chemical dependency, but it also works for TBI and PTSD.
And Deborah Mash, in her cohort, Deborah then really did the heroic work, because she said, okay, we cannot do it in the US. So she set up a clinic in the Caribbean and did 200 patients, maybe more.
To collect data.
Yeah, and published it, some of it published it, which was really important to have it in scientific literature, not just anecdotal reports. And in those studies and in same kids, already they saw antidepressant effect and anxiety reducing effect. So it was like, oh, okay, so it's reducing addiction symptoms, but also it's reducing depression and anxiety. And then years later, PTSD symptoms. What's going on here? Right. And at the same time, we just did not have an answer for how it works. because it shows, it doesn't, I remember we sent Ibogaine for this broad screen so we can look at 50 plus brain receptors and ion channels and all these molecules that neuropharmacologists work with all the time. Serotonin receptors, dopamine receptors, these ion channels and all this. And it came back and was empty. No effect. And I'm skipping forward, but on the journey, in the beginning of my journey, I don't know if I told you, I had this, I was ramping up, and all of a sudden the table showed up with 0 results, like no activity, and I was laughing out loud. It was like, that was funny, remember? So I was like, what? So I was like, okay, snake oil, the first response. But then just more results keep coming from clinics and from all this. And so we just kept digging. And sometimes we just didn't know how to do it. It was just so complex and not clear. And as a chemist, we usually need a molecular target so we can optimize for that molecular target. You can screen and test. And it was these starts and stops. But we kept going, which I'm so glad we did. And all of a sudden, and rereading the literature and doing more and finding like, now we're finding some targets. So there's actually transporters, neurotransmitter transporters that are being modulated. And now they're being modulated in a very special ways. And there are all these molecular tricks. And this old literature, so I start putting this bigger picture and then it really dawned on me one day that this is a completely different pharmacological concept. So we cannot put Ibogaine, and this is my theory, right, which I call Ibogaine or Iboga matrix pharmacology. So that's the leading theory now for us, that Ibogaine defies classical paradigms of pharmacology that we teach in school and in graduate schools. It just has its own logic. So that was huge, and it was even just for my lab, it was huge because it changed the way how we think and how we construct the plan and how we design experiments. So it was it's important shift, conceptual shift, that how to think about the molecule. So, and then now we're building the theory. It's this huge matrix of interactions. So I use that analogy of Manhattan, right? And the traffic jam, and you had the grit of streets, and Manhattan, of course, is, riddled with traffic jams every day. So that's something that's very close to me. I live in New York City. And so imagine, okay, how would you solve a traffic jam? So classical pharmacology analogy based on classical pharmacology would be, well, you go to Times Square, a major hub, and you start relieving or doing things to that hub, which then propagates and ripples through the whole grid. And Ibogaine really works that in a way that it starts manipulating traffic throughout the entire Manhattan. So you imagine this octopus, but it's not an octopus. It's many polypus, right? You have so many different arms, and they're coming in and they're tweaking, adding a lane here, removing a lane here, opening up street here, opening up the subway.
All at once. So that's an intelligent.
All at once, and or in a very specific temporal sequence, meaning at certain times it's doing this, and then there's this, but it has a plan.
It has a strategy.
It must be that is that's using logic. If this mechanism is so complex, it works everywhere at the same time, more or less, or in some sequence, it's planning, like playing chess. You're planning 3, 4, 5 moves ahead.
So it is like AI, but smarter. More advanced.
Smarter.
You think it's smarter?
Yeah, much smarter. If we are correct, right? Let's just remind ourselves that this is a theory and hypothesis based on our findings and based on 20 years of work and based on the global literature and knowledge about Ibogaine, but it is a theory.
Very interesting. Can you share a little bit about Ibogaine analogs? Why do we need them? I mean, your recent, congratulations, you're co-founder of Gilgamesh, and recently the work that you've been doing has been validated. You sold an analog to AbbVie, which is very exciting. It's not an Ibogaine analog, but it's a different analog. Curious to hear about the analogs that you have developed and why Ibogaine needs analogs. Some people in our popular culture would say, well, should we be taking Iboga and creating new analogs? Is that ethical to do that to nature? I'd love to hear more your thoughts around analog.
Important question. So in the Iboga tree, there already are analogs, right? So it's not, Ibogaine is the main psychoactive and psychedelic component, but there are others that are very closely related to Ibogaine, but there is already a nice little collection of alkaloids. So even the plant is making various analogs. So, and we don't understand the role of the minor ones, and we're studying that too, and we're learning a lot. But there are two major reasons why we do this. The number one reason is that cardiac effect, which can be managed, and we're learning that. And I see that you here at the clinic are pioneers and moving this forward. So Ibogaine can be used safely and should be rolled out with utmost attention to safety. Ibogaine itself, but still it is a major concern, and there's a lot going on to minimize that list. So the key idea is, can we make an Ibogaine version, Ibogaine analog, that would minimize or completely remove the cardiac risk? So,
which would be great.
Which would be great.
One of the challenges to accessibility is the cost, right? Our costs are so high because we have a team of dozens of doctors and nurses, and that cost would be reduced
and
for
all the preparation
for the end user. If the cardiac risk was mitigated, people would still need a place to go to experience the medicine, to have the therapy and the support, but you wouldn't need as many doctors, and therefore it would be more accessible to more people if we could develop an analog that was safer.
Right. That's right. And even people who cannot qualify for Ibogaine treatment because they have severe arrhythmia or other diseases, then that opens up the accessibility to others who have cardiac conditions. And so that's really important. And that's then the next interesting question comes up, which is, well, how do you remove it? How do you engineer out that cardiac risk without disturbing or destroying the matrix pharmacology, which is so complex and we don't fully understand it? So it is a very interesting and challenging scientific problem. So imagine you have this matrix of targets. So the way I visualize what Ibogaine does when it's ingested and makes its way into blood and through blood to brain and the nervous system throughout the body, that it, in contrast to other substances like LSD, which is very tight, binds tightly to its receptors, it's kind of brushing throughout the nervous system and touching and brushing on various different targets, very different components of the signaling system. So it's this remarkable, I call it technology because it's too complex and too different from other drugs to call it a drug. So then we really don't fully understand how it's doing it. So how do you remove the cardiac without disturbing that? So that really pushing us to develop new thinking, new experiments where you're looking at the whole complex signaling properties. So it's really pushing us to really in that AI direction. I think that Ibogaine is a perfect match, if you will, for the AI age. Just to understand it more deeply, and then to be able to engineer out the cardiac risk. But this first analog, which we call oxa-ibogaine and oxa-noribogaine, we were lucky. We made the change. The change is very small structurally, but it has these consequences. And one of them is teaching us, the Ibogaine is showing us, look, I can minimize the cardiac risk by this mechanism. And I never thought of that. I would not think of that mechanism. And again, another example, it is doing these really unusual things. So Ibogaine is unique, I think, in two ways. One, it works throughout the matrix pharmacology, very complex brushing through the living system. And two, the individual brushes, the individual interactions are, if not unique, very unusual or very sophisticated. That example that we talked about earlier this week is the pharmaco chaperone effect, that it binds to a known serotonin transporter molecule, and not only it binds in a different way from, let's say, SSRIs like fluoxetine, but it helps to fold the protein into a proper shape. So proteins are made as strings of amino acids, but that string has to fold into a precise three-dimensional object so that it can function properly as a transporter, for example. And it helps to fold the protein into the proper shape. And there are mutations in this transporter which cause misfolding. So the protein cannot fold properly because of the genetic mutation. And so they're referred to as folding deficient mutants. And Ibogaine compensates the mutation and allows the protein to fold properly and function. So that to me was like, oh, okay.
That's wild. The other thing,
This is wild. It was like, we're dealing with something very different here. So this one bit is just so telling that it's binding to a protein that other drugs bind to, like antidepressants, right? Famous protein. So you would say, oh, that's boring. It's just like SSRIs, but it's binding to a different part of the molecule. It induces very different dance of the molecule, and it helps to fold it. So it's like, oh, okay.
Last night you said something very interesting at dinner too. We talked about how Ibogaine meets each person where they are at. I wonder how you explain that from a science perspective.
Yeah.
You said it almost like in another realm and keeps it there, and then picks up later.
Yeah, that leads us to the other side of the spectrum, which is from molecular to subjective effects. How do people feel? What does it feel like to take the medicine, to take Ibogaine? And how it actually actuates, how it facilitates that restorative and healing process.
When we say meet people where they're at, I mean, like, some people aren't ready for massive revelations yet. Maybe they just come for a physical detox and they need to get their life together, versus people that are further along in their journey of consciousness evolution. They've already done a lot of work. They'll give them much more. I mean, the Ibogaine, I'm talking about like it's an alien, will give that person more data that's a bit more global or related to what they need to do to help heal humanity.
Yes, so the subjective reports, subjective experiences are, so from molecular to now subjective experiences, right? So, and that's the connection that I'm fascinated by. From molecular level straight up to subjective effects, restorative effects, and all that. So, of course, to explain that at molecular level is very difficult, but yes, the subjective reports are very rich. They appear to be personalized. So instead of standardizing, right, we would love to have everybody to have the same experience. It's not happening. And it looks more like what you were saying is that it somehow determines the level of information sharing or messaging to the person.
Because with something like LSD or other psychedelics, it's people have similar experiences. Would you say that's true? Whereas with
the Ibogaine?
No, similar amongst population.
It's also very individual too. I think for all psychedelics, it's, you never know what you're going to get. So I would say it's a general phenomenon for psychedelics, but it appears to be particularly true for Ibogaine. Yeah. And so now we're getting into this interesting question is, well, science has tried to eliminate subjectivity for decades, if not centuries. And mental health and psychedelics are taking us right back to that, because subjectivity is so important. And the way we learn about whether the treatment is effective or not is largely still through personal reports. How do you feel? Right? The scale 1 to 10. How's your depression? How's your, all that. So we have to, and psychedelics are, because it's the most profound phenomenon of psychedelics is the subjective experience. That's why they are so remarkable and so interesting. So we're taken right back to this. How do we do science of subjectivity? Which is fascinating.
Which leads us into the meat of the conversation. So you've been objective for 20 years plus now.
Sure.
Related to Ibogaine in a lab working. I went to the lab, you have a beautiful team supporting you. You spent more than 20 years studying this molecule. Why Ibogaine? Why now for yourself? And what happens when the scientist takes the molecule?
Right. So I have been objective, as you said, for 20 plus years. And that's a good thing. Scientists cultivate a healthy skepticism. So if you claim certain phenomenon, certain observation, certain discovery, to be accepted, it has to be supported by data. And the data has to be reproducible. And I want to bring this up. That's one of the hallmarks of scientific method. How do we do science? Is reproducibility. While in the subjective realm, it's typically the uniqueness of the subjective experience that is meaningful, right? So it's very different from this end of the spectrum to the end. Uniqueness, irreproducibility, right, of experience is what's really special. Yes, so in that sense, I've been objective for a long time, but we've been collecting personal reports for a long time. We have hundreds of them, which I just think is an extremely, in this area of research, psychoactive molecules, psychedelic molecules, and oniric molecules like Ibogaine, which means dream-inducing. It is just an essential part of its business, right? So you cannot ignore it or say, oh, these are subjective. That's a very important information. What are people going through and what are the experiences? And as you know better than most people, these reports are absolutely remarkable. Again, just like removing the dependence on opioids, it's unbelievable. It's really challenging paradigms to explain what people are reporting. So it's right. They lose their severe symptoms for all sorts of ailments. And at the same time, they're reporting that the experience is telling them what Ibogaine is doing. So there are metaphors, visuals about restoration, reparation on a physiological level. Then it's, of course, telling them about psychological domains, personal relationships, importance of your relationship with your closest social group. And messages that are really highly, highly meaningful to people. So again, suggesting this molecule induces states that somehow can understand, read the person's memories and identify what's subjectively important to them. So phenomenologically, meaning we're looking at this body of literature, what people are reporting, hundreds of reports. And so as a scientist, I look at it and say, well, this suggests some sort of higher order function, some sort of, we can call it intelligence. So I cannot ignore that, right? Trying to be a good scientist, you cannot just say, oh, that's all subjective. We're not going to worry about it. No, in this business, psychedelics, oneirogens, you have to take it serious. And then going back again. So, okay, now we have this, let's just hypothesize. We have this intelligent molecular system, this intelligent system. So how do we go back? How do we explain that on the molecular level and other levels that we can measure, we can confirm? So this is the space where my lab and me and others, you included, of course, our researchers in Ibogaine, we are trying to figure out what's going on here, right? We're mapping the scope of therapeutic effects, what other things it can heal and restore. But then I'm fascinated with the idea, how does it work? And why would you care about that? That's another question, right? I sometimes am asked, why do you care about that? When we discovered humanity penicillin and antibiotics, we didn't know how they work, and they worked really well. without knowing how they work, but realizing how they work led us to many different classes, the new classes of antibiotics and new antivirals and all that. So
Ibogaine will lead us, and Iboga will lead us to many more.
Yeah, so if our hypothesis is correct, the matrix hypothesis, then Ibogaine is opening up this entire new space, multidimensional space of possibilities of treatment, healing, spiritual connectivity and more. And even as a scientist, what I learned from therapists and coaches and psychologists and psychiatrists, that severe trauma can be treated most effectively by invoking spiritual domains, right? Invoking the meaning of what is this about? What are you about? Where are some higher connectivity that allows person to step out of that suffering and reframe the trauma. So again, right, Ibogaine and psychedelics take us to this interface between hardcore science and spirituality. That to me is that interface, that frontier, that it's risky because one can slip very quickly right out of the scientific method and kind of lose footing or be discredited by the mainstream scientific establishment. But as they've seen over and over in human affairs and in science, these interfaces, these frontiers, that's where new things really come from. That's where breakthrough discoveries come from.
Right. Science is not advanced enough yet to explain the spiritual aspects.
So, but we're beginning to really, and right, we're trying to address that. Scientific community is becoming more open to it. So it's a great time.
Well,
it's a
maybe
really
you could
great
share how, we've known each other for a while. You wanted to come to Beond and experience this medicine for the first time. You committed to it, and then you had a connection with the medicine. Even before coming, it started working with you.
Yeah, it's and you have it in your booklet when you're preparing people to come here, that there's this, and many people kind of feel almost the effects of medicine even when they commit to take the medicine. So that,
which science won't be able to. How do you not take the molecule but already start to have visions before coming or feel somatically the experience?
So there's no, so the mainstream scientists would explain it as sociogenic effects. So somebody tells you, like classic examples, you go to the mountains and you have two groups going to the mountains, and you tell one group, in the higher elevations, people typically get a headache. And then they go up, and the group that was told that headache is common, more people get headache than the others. So sociogenic, just like we have, infections by viruses and bacteria, there's also infections or transmission of information through a communication. So I think that scientists would say, well, this is some sort of sociogenic phenomenon. So I read, I can have effects, and I'm really excited about that experience. So it just creates that.
What do you believe is true? And can you share what happened for you prior to coming?
Yeah, so I had this almost a oniric like, appearance of faces from Africa. So it was very, very interesting and very unexpected.
You said you were sitting at lunch at Columbia, in a very
right.
formal setting in this fancy dining room, and an African face came right by you.
Yes, right in front, and just went away. So it could be disturbing, but I just welcomed it, and I said, this is incredible. As a scientist, I don't have explanation, obviously, for that. I can, as a scientist, as a person, I also, of course, I'm interested. We could talk about the spirituality and other things as a human being, right? We have all sorts of feelings and opinions about these things, but in the scientific realm, there's really no clear explanation. There's the sociogenic explanation, right? I've been working with this molecule for so long. I've been reading and rereading the African reports and seeing the films and photos about the Bwiti tradition, where people paint their faces white and they dance and chant and taking iboga and all this. So I've been saturated with these images and with being in the field. So then one could explain it that this is just, I'm excited to come, and just one of these images will come up, like, daydreaming and something like that. So it'll be the most conservative explanation, and it's not a bad one. It's just conservative. Then, of course, on the other way, you could explain it. Oh, this is some sort of a a psychic phenomenon that we don't understand, and akin to quantum entanglement. The recent Nobel Prize in Physics was given to quantum entanglement, which is this phenomenon, which is really spooky and hard to explain. What I love about that story is basically, I'm not a particle physicist, but in essence, it's when you create two quantum particles, tiny little particles, which are more like bundles of information. You can think about them. So subatomic, very small, or you have photons. When you create them a certain way, and then they're propagating away from each other in opposite direction, they have when they're created a certain way, they have certain properties. And regardless how far apart they are, they could be across Manhattan, they could be across the continent, it could be in two different galaxies. When one changes that property, the other changes it too. So very spooky. So it's clearly not dependent on the distance.
It's not dependent on time and space.
It's not dependent on time and space, and it's outside of this energy universe that we have. And the great story about this is that 2 or 3 physicists, when it was observed first time, they set out to create special instrumentation to disprove it. At least 2 physicists independently, but they couldn't. And they just kept coming back. So they just had to accept this really bizarre and spooky phenomenon that was discovered, that there is some connection between these particles that is outside of our kind of time space. So then, right, we could get wild here and say, well, there's this, so there might be other phenomena like that. But that gets into the psychic and parapsychology and all this. And this is, I want to be cautious there, because all these years of parapsychology researchers really haven't produced anything that would be scientific, reliable, and reproducible and measurable and all this. So
right. Well,
it's all kind of was like, oh, it's a hogwash. Yeah.
Right. So when you actually did come here to Beond to experience Ibogaine, what was it like for you? What did the medicine show you?
So I was ready and I had questions. That's another phenomenon that people report, that people ask questions and then
you can interact.
And you can interact and the answers come and all this. So yes, I was very open and ready and went through the preparation program that you have here, which is fantastic. And so I just submitted to the experience, and it was absolutely remarkable. It was very intense, but very actually pleasant. It was like like a kid in a toy store. I was just shown all these abilities, but as a scientist, again, I can report, you keep your biological consciousness, the consciousness we use right now to talk. You keep that.
The analyzer.
The analyzer and the commentator, and it's still, you're not hallucinating or you're blown away.
So you're present.
You're present, and you are aware of yourself. You know where you are, you know who you are and all this. But then there comes these projections. So I could see in quotes through the mask, and I had lots of visual representations. Not all people have them, as you know. So I had very rich visuals, and they appear projected in front of you, and then they appear, very realistic, but you're still having that basal consciousness. So I have a control in that state of what I'm going to say or I'm going to ask, but I don't have control of those projections.
Of what you're being shown. So Ibogaine's showing you what it wants you to see.
So we could explain this. It's an interesting experiment, because I and my biological consciousness is asking questions of a non-ordinary state, non-ordinary consciousness that's created by Ibogaine interacting with my nervous system, right? So as I had these discussions earlier with some of your clients here, they were saying, well, this is like you're mirroring yourself, or you're creating some sort of special mirror to have that conversation. So it's interesting. It's, yes, skeptically, again, if you have questions, this is some sort of a self-affirming mechanism because you're asking a different version of your mind, of your nervous system. So it's extremely interesting. So whatever I learned, I cannot take as absolute truth because I'm asking basically myself in an altered state. So
if you're going to have to test it in the lab, it sounds like you came up with new ideas.
The thing is that it answered all my questions, and I asked humbly, could we draw molecules? And there's nothing. So, and then there was lots of going on, and I had it gave me a massive lecture on technology and versus nature, or technology and nature. And it showed me the crafts, ancient crafts and old technologies and very futuristic objects of technologies, and then the plants and plant-based materials. And it was just sweeping arc of, it was incredible. And all these new materials and all these therapeutic devices and injecting devices. And the design was just exquisite. And it also gave me, in the slower part of the journey, gave me this time to really see these objects and look at them from different angles. And it was fantastic. And so then I was completely absorbed, but then I again slipped in, could we draw structures?
Could we draw structures?
Could we draw structures?
Like new analogs?
Yeah, like chemists do, right? We draw structures. And the Lego, right? The Lego game. Can we play the Lego game? And they didn't say no, just no answer. So I tried to conjure up the structures into the simulation field, and it just didn't stick and didn't go. So I was like, okay, it's not gonna work. But then when I was moved to a different room, so this was kind of an ER room, right, in the acute phase, and then for the calmer phases of the experience, we're transferred to this resting room. And there was this one control light. Like, there was the little toy with projecting lights on the wall. And that control light, without glasses, I'm nearsighted, looked like a blurred puff of green light in the space. And I looked at it, and it got focused. It created a 3-dimensional grid, and it created molecular models. Hey, I was giving high five to Ibogaine. We were doing high fives. I was like, to me, this is a psychotechnical breakthrough. Maybe we can hypothesize how it works. And I looked at it, and it showed me the structure of Ibogaine, and I was like, yes, that's correct. So it showed me, I refer to it as my nervous system with Ibogaine, right? And I was like, okay, and it rotates it. So and then it showed me new analogs that we were making. So confirming, okay, I'm with you. And then it started showing me new molecules. And then I look at the projections of those other lights in different colors on the wall. And there it was, more molecules and more messages. And I just got my notebook, and I started drawing and capturing as much as I could. It was absolutely, absolutely remarkable that, right, if you think about this, so there's a blurred, my regular vision is blurred. It uses that as projection screen, basically. And in the projected part, it creates, I have to think about this a little more, how this really works. Just on a scientific level, how do you actually create, it's in the vision, it's in a simulation. So it basically takes the light, and in a simulation, it refocuses and projects into it. It creates it's an amazing loop.
Wow. What's also amazing to me is that, so I would think that some of these Iboga or even Ibogaine would be jealous or want to be the only one, right? You're creating orphans.
Great question.
You're creating children. Analogs are essentially children of a father or a mother molecule. This basically tells us that it wants to be, it wants orphans. So you were uncertain of this before. How is that level of certainty now?
Yeah, I at the end had the conversation. I said, is it okay that we are really tapping deep into your structure and into mechanisms and all this.
Do I have your permission?
Yes, I asked for permission, and it was, the answer was just enthusiastic. It was like instant. It's like, oh no, go, you gotta go. So again, I'm asking myself on Ibogaine, right? So because I have these two consciousnesses, really, I have the basal. Even in this stage, I maintain my standard consciousness, and then I have this projection simulation that is giving me answers. So it's extremely interesting, but the answer from myself on Ibogaine, which we can call it or we can call it Ibogaine, was enthusiastic, yes, and it wanted to play. It wanted to play and wanted to draw molecules and more and show me molecules that then I didn't understand. I was like, oh, it will take me time to really try to interpret this, what it means. It was absolutely incredible. I mean, this is, and I realized it when we were, giving high five each other and fist bumping. I realized that this is a psychotechnical breakthrough that he could, and psychedelics.
It's a benevolent being. It wants to co-create with you, and I'm guessing it wants to help humanity.
Yes. And on other psychedelics, one would see sometimes molecular structures, but they come and there's no really clarity or manipulation. Here I asked questions and it just was showing me, but that precision, and then it rotates the virtual light projection, and I mean that's what really leads me to this interim conclusion that it's a really sophisticated molecular psychotechnology, really.
So it sounds like you have a lot of work to do now, a lot of material to test in your lab and new analogs to create.
And so I asked myself, meaning myself with Ibogaine, how it works, and it answered. And of course, it's self-confirmatory, strictly speaking, but it's certainly, I didn't get a feedback like you're totally on the wrong track. This is a mishmash of ideas. It really showed me more and more deeper, something that I don't even understand. I have to think about and interpret. But it looks like it confirmed this hypothesis that it's a very complex computational system, basically.
I'm curious too, observing clients on site for the past many, many days, was there anything that clarified Ibogaine's mechanism or potential future analogs, or maybe you want to share an anonymous, we don't want to share clients' names, but a client story that helped support this a new idea for you in a different way than prior to coming?
Yeah, that's so powerful to be here as part of the patients and the clients, right? I wasn't an observer who would be just walking around and objectively, right, observing. I was in it.
And you're in a living lab. It's basically what you do every day, but you're watching the clients.
That's right.
In real time.
Incredible, because these reports, that what drove for years and decades Ibogaine research, just not mainstream observations, right? They all come from anecdotes or clinics abroad. And this keeps drawing the Ibogaine pushing the Ibogaine research forward, right? So I was always like, oh, new report, it's fascinating. What does it do? So here I am with it. I'm seeing these people coming and leaving, and the transformation, and all sorts of conditions that people. Usually these people come. What I saw this week is that's a last hope they have. 30 years of alcoholism, ruined marriage, kids left this person. He built a business that was destroyed. I mean, nothing worked. Suicide was the only option that was considered, and they come here as a last hope. Or this person that came with a neck injury and suffering from chronic pain. I mean, what he's telling me now, I'm really just shaking my hand, thinking, is this for real?
Yeah, that's for real. I hope you continue to follow up with these new friends you made too, and see how they're doing in 3 months and 6 months.
Very interesting.
You can do your own research outside of our own Beond research, please.
Right. But the ad experiences are, and this lady too, she just came out of the experience next day, and she's just shaking her head. It's like, oh my God, this download. I had all this information about all these questions and my personal, social interactions, or these athletes, right, with TBI coming out and talking about somebody who's been thinking about psychology in their life for 20 years, in my ego, and while I was totally mismanaging my family and all this. The insights are deep. And this one fellow who was a special operation forces, Army special operations, and he was multiple TBIs, explained to me that part of the training of becoming a special operation is you acquire TBI, because shooting these weapons and you do it, you train, so that just is so severe that it induces TBI. And he was basically just wishing to kill himself and die, just completely ruined life. And he did one big session up again here, and now he's a coach, bringing other people, helping others.
Oh, that's right.
Very productive. It's just, it's really unbelievable. For a scientist coming from mainstream academia, if you don't prepare anybody for this, you would bring them here, they would be confused.
There's nothing like
they would not know what's going on. They would think like this is some sort of a simulation, or that they're, that they're actors.
Yeah.
It's some sort of a movie.
You get a lot of researchers and physicians who come through for a day or two, and they really have a hard time believing it. But once you see it, it's hard to ignore.
Yeah, and then of course, as a scientist, skepticism is like, well, they're high. They're still high for 2 days.
Well, the coach you spoke to, that was already 9 months ago.
I don't know. And that's hard to argue with that one. That's 9 months ago.
Yeah.
So it's actually a healthy skepticism, meaning I'm maintaining my skeptical scientific foundation, and I think that's healthy. But I'm accepting this. Well, I've been in this field for 20 years, so this is not new to me. But seeing it firsthand and the stories, everybody has their life story. So this is not just another N number in the clinical report, right? It's a person, and that person has story and all this, and you see all this suffering, and seeing this level of relief and insight, and it's very profound. I think that this, I always felt this, and this sense of duty, that too much skepticism would hinder us, and that would be really almost unethical, not to enable people to be healed and not to be treated with this remarkable medicine. At the same time, I had one major message from my journey. I was thrilled, exhilarated by that breakthrough, how I could set up a communication with different states of consciousness, basically, on a molecular level and all this. But I was also spooked by that. I said, this is really sci-fi. And then I had this strong feeling and kind of a message. It came in this, you get these messages and answers that we have to be very careful and very responsible as we roll out this technology out there, because this is not just something you just take home, and this is a powerful restorative.
Right. There is a real
algorithm.
It's from a mystery school that's 10,000 years old, and was only used by a small group in Central West Africa.
Secretive.
And a secretive.
Format, right.
So
I really want to understand that. We've talked about it last night, the reasons and evolution of that secrecy, and why and how this really was used. And because this is no joke. This is a very powerful molecular technology.
Yeah, it's not for everybody. It's for people that are ready and willing and want to do the work. It's not a silver bullet, as we know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm curious, what gives you the most hope about Ibogaine and its analogs contributing to human healing? Just as we wrap up, if you could share a little bit.
I'm now leaving your clinic in your wonderful place. I want to congratulate you on achieving this, which is really spectacular. I'm leaving this with extremely hopeful for humanity, because I see this as a completely novel algorithm, if you will, that can achieve what appears to be remarkable and really unprecedented treatment options and healing options here. So I feel, as I was quoting these conclusions from ethnographers who worked in Africa in 1950s and 1960s, where they paraphrasing would say that Iboga demands transformation of self and restores order and really serves as a centering piece of structuring spiritual beliefs and spiritual practices and the social order, which is a very powerful conclusion. So when I was reaching this conclusion, I felt that Ibogaine demands. I feel like it's demanding this work. It's a lot of fun. I want to do it, but I felt this is now duty to really develop this fully. I see it as antibiotics. Ibogaine is, to me, on the impact level, the comparison or the line to conclude would be, it is like antibiotics for neurological, mental, and spiritual health. It has that type of potential. So I think it's our duty to safely and responsibly develop it and scale it so that humanity can benefit.
Well, thank you for the work you're doing to, be in the center of that. I truly appreciate it. So more people can reach it, and it can be scaled, with...
And same to you.
With care.
Yes, as you're showing the way to do it for Ibogaine itself.
Thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on Ibogaine Uncovered and to have you at Beond in general. I hope you come back and visit soon.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.